believe so.
Okay, thank you. The first thing on our agenda this morning is a public hearing. This public hearing held by the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board is called to order and is being held pursuant to KRS Chapter 77 and district regulation. Notice of this meeting has been published pursuant to state law. This public hearing is being held by video teleconference due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Instructions on making written and oral statements by video teleconference have been distributed to everyone. All statements must be presented today. Statements should be concise. All statements will become a part of the hearing record. There is one amended regulation to be reviewed today. Would the staff please present District Regulation 5.15 version 4, Chemical Accident Prevention Provisions. Mr. Gary.
Thank you, Chairman Helton, members of the board. This morning, the district brings for your consideration proposed amendments to Regulation 5.15, Chemical Accident Prevention Provisions. This would be version 4. Regulation 5.15 implements the requirements of Section 112R of the U.S. Clean Air Act and mirrors federal regulations found at 40 CFR Part 68. Regulation 5.15 and Part 68 are both commonly known as the Risk Management Plan, or RMP, program for the plans companies subject to the rule are required to develop. These amendments incorporate two sets of changes. First, there are several minor changes that were made to the federal rules between 2001, when Regulation 515 was last amended, and 2004. Second, there are several more significant amendments which incorporate versions of the amendments made to the federal rule in 2017. These amendments, known as the RMP Amendments Rule, were later reconsidered, and many were rescinded from the federal rule in the RMP Reconsideration Rule. Sorry, I've got a dog in the background making a little bit of noise, trying to calm him down. So the amendments which were adopted into the federal rule and later rescinded included the requirements for facilities in certain industries to conduct a Safer Technologies Alternative Analysis, or STAA, covered processes, for facilities to conduct a third-party audit after a reportable accident, for facilities to conduct a root cause analysis after catastrophic accidents or near misses, and for facilities to provide certain information to the public upon request and provide ongoing notification of the availability of information. Additional requirements adopted in the RMP Amendments Rule and not rescinded in the RMP Reconsideration Rule include emergency response coordination activities, emergency response exercises, which were modified but retained, and a requirement for a public meeting to be held by companies after a reportable accident. The proposed amendments would include all additional requirements retained in the current version of the federal rules, plus additional requirements based on rescinded portions of the federal rule. The amendments, as proposed, require an STAA for all new processes at chemical manufacturing, coal and petroleum products manufacturing, and paper manufacturing facilities, a third-party audit after a reportable accident at these same facilities, and a root cause analysis after catastrophic accidents or near misses. During the written comment period held from December 11, 2020 to February 9, 2021, the district received comments from 3 entities. A response comment document was sent to all board members and posted to the docket for this action prior to this hearing. Based on one of those comments, the district recommends the following additional amendments in order to remain consistent with the requirement currently found at 40 CFR Section 68.210B to delete the requirement to disclose other relevant chemical hazard information, quote, at a public meeting required after an accident. The district recommends adopting the amendments to Regulation 515 as proposed, with a minor amendment just noted. However, due to the significance of these amendments and the length of the preliminary response to comments provided to the board prior to this meeting, the district encourages the board to delay voting on the amendments after any discussion today to take further time to consider them, as well as the draft response to comments and any oral comments made at today's hearing.
Mr. Gurry, has any member of the public registered make a statement this morning?
No, Chairman Hilton.
Has any member of the public submitted a written statement?
Yes, Chairman Hilton. In addition to the 3 written comments that we received during the written comment period, for which the response comment document was sent, we received a written comment early this morning from Tina Halbig, who was unable to be present at 10 a.m. because of a prior appointment. She states,
Okay.
I am with the Floyd's Fork Environmental Association and UNA USA Kentucky Division. We are working on PFAS/forever chemicals and are in favor of more stringent regulations regarding air emissions. It is best to have companies using those fluoro products to have thermal oxidizers. Please do have the regulations be more stringent by adopting the amendments.
Okay, thank you. I just have one a question for you. When I thank you for sending the response to this amended regulation, but it was all companies. I didn't see any community organizations whatsoever regarding the response to this regulation. I think what you sent me was all companies, named companies.
The 3 comments we received were from Hexion, which is a chemical facility in the Rubbertown area, from Greater Louisville, Inc., and from the Kentucky Paint Council and their associated national association. We did not receive any comments from members of the public.
You know, I think a lot of people, when they saw this, they didn't realize that this is a risk management plan. Is that correct? Part of the risk management? And we refer it to as the chemical accident prevention provisions. So it might be a little confusion. People probably don't realize that this is the RMP plan, isn't it?
This is the RMP program. The title of the regulation is the same title as Part 68. The
Right.
RMP is sort of the colloquial name, and that's officially the name of the plans that the companies have to develop rather than the official name of the rule, which is why it's referred to differently. However, I will note that we first released an notice of proposed rulemaking last spring. We did have 2 public meetings during that period to engage the public, and we did have a few members of community organizations attend those public meetings. So I think that most of the members of the public were made aware in advance of this. Hopefully it's not any confusion that is causing a lack of interest, but I couldn't state for sure.
Well, thank you. Are there any other?
Yes. No, sorry, I have a question. Byron?
Could I make a point of order real fast? We need to first see if there are any participants on the teleconference that wish to make a comment, and then we'll go straight to board questions.
Any, are there any one from the public wish to make a statement? If so, please raise your hand via
people.
Pardon?
Chairman Hilton, I do not see any raised hands at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
We can now go to board questions. Thank you.
Okay, I had a question for Byron. Yeah, and the responses, I was curious about GLI because all there was GLI, no identifier, but you explained that it's Greater Louisville, Inc. Do you, I assume that's kind of like a, I don't know, what is it, like a business group or something?
Sorry, I put that at the first comment. I put how Ms. Cave, who was representing GLI, signed it. I forgot that she didn't spell it out. I probably should have. Greater Louisville, Inc. is the local chamber of commerce.
Oh, the local chamber of commerce.
Commerce, okay.
All right. So, so someone from the local chamber of commerce or their attorneys or something wrote up these responses. Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions by board members?
Not from me.
Hearing none, there being no further statements or questions, this public hearing is adjourned. I will now call the regular meeting of the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board to order. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we are conducting the monthly March meeting today by video teleconference. Now I will conduct a roll call of board members that are present on this teleconference. When I call your name, please say here. Steve Sullivan.
Here.
Dr. Colbert. Dr. A.
Here.
Candace White.
Here.
Thank you. Heather Allen.
Here.
And Keith Joy. Keith? Okay. Mrs. Hampton, do we have any introductions this morning?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Are there any public recognitions this morning, Mr. Hamilton?
Yes, Chairman Hilton, thank you. Notes here together. So good morning, everyone. And thank you, Chairman Hilton, for this opportunity to provide this public recognition. As last week, we talked about some of the efforts that APCD staff have made during COVID-19. I want to continue that. And in particular, I'd like to recognize APCD's air monitoring staff for their work in operating, auditing, and maintaining APCD's sophisticated air monitoring network during COVID-19. Early on, US EPA identified air monitoring as a mission-critical operation. The staff have had to find ways to socially distance and remain safe while working within the small confines of our air monitoring shelters and continuing their outstanding work. And even though US EPA may have specifically called out air monitoring, APCD believes that all of its work is necessary to improve air quality in Louisville. So I'd also like to recognize APCD's industrial compliance and enforcement staff who continue to safely inspect facilities, evaluate data, and assess compliance without interruption. And APCD's industrial permitting staff whose day-to-day work can most easily be done virtually, but has since showed the agency that it's possible to successfully onboard and effectively train new staff virtually. This is no small feat. APCD's work is complex and requires a lot of on-the-job training and information sharing. Thank you, Chairman Hilton.
Thank you. Moving right along, the minutes of the public hearing held on February 17th, 2021 were distributed electronically for your review. Are there any changes to the minutes by board members? Any upgrades? Okay. Hearing none, the minutes of the February 17th, 2021 meeting, those minutes are approved. Thank you. Mr. Gurr, has anyone registered to make a comment this morning?
Chairman Hilton, we still have the regular board meeting minutes to approve. We approved the public hearing minutes and we need to approve the regular.
You were right, I'm sorry, yeah. The minutes of the public hearing held on February 21st, February 17th, 2021 were distributed electronically for your review. Are there any changes to the minutes by board members on the public hearing held on February 17th, 2021?
I believe those were approved. We need to approve the regular meeting minutes.
I just approved it. Just went through the regular meetings first.
There may be some confusion. I heard public hearing on the first round.
No, it was a regular meeting. Okay. The minutes of the, let's start over.
Okay.
For the public hearing, are there
Okay.
any changes or upgrades to the public hearing on February 17th, 2021? Public hearing. Hearing none, those minutes are approved. Now for the regular meeting minutes held on February 17th, are there any changes, revisions, upgrades to the meeting minutes of February 17th of the regular meeting? Hearing none, the regular meeting minutes of February 17th are approved. Okay. Mr. Gurry, has anyone registered to make a statement this morning?
No, Chairman Hilton.
Has anyone provided written comments this morning?
No, Chairman Hilton.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make a brief comment on this teleconference? Please raise your hand via teleconference and you will be called upon. This is a feature you can find on your phone by pressing *3. If joining by phone, you will be called on. Andy, have we seen anyone that wishes to make a statement this morning?
No, Chairman Hilton.
Thank you. Mr. Gurry? I guess we don't have anyone that wishes to make a statement this morning. Now we're moving on to unfinished business. I don't think there is no unfinished business this morning. New business. Under new business, we have District Regulations 5.15, version 4, chemical accident prevention provision. The district has recommended that the board delay voting on the amended regulations 5.15 version until all comments can be considered. Is there a motion to delay the voting on this amended regulation by board members? Can I get a motion from our board member to delay the voting on this?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Can we get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussions?
Is there anticipation how long that would be, the delay?
Mr. Gary, I'm not for sure. I think they still processing the comments. Do you have any feel of maybe by next month we could?
Ms. Bach can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe a vote to delay would automatically delay the vote for just 1 month. It would automatically reappear under unfinished business at next month's board meeting. In addition, we did put out that response to all comments except for the comments that I read off from Ms. Halbig this morning. So I anticipate we would have response to all comments well before that next.
I'd like to clarify, it will delay the vote until the district feels that it can bring that to consideration to the board after all comments have been fully reviewed and provided to the board. So the board will receive notification from the district that all comments have been reviewed and thoroughly considered and brought to the board's attention for their consideration. We believe that will happen by the next board meeting.
Okay.
Is the comment period now closed as of today by virtue of the hearing, or is it extended?
I'll let Mr. Gary answer that, but it was closed.
Yes, the written comment period was from December 11th to February 9th, December 11th, 2020 to February 9th of this year. So the written comment period closed prior to this public hearing. The public hearing was the last opportunity for public comment.
So in other words, we can't receive any comments from any community group or organization? How are you going to handle that?
You know, if anybody submits comments, we'll have to talk about how we deal with that. However, the official written comment period and oral comment period have now closed. We did give several public notices, including via Gov Delivery and via publicly in the newspaper of those.
Right.
You know, we never say that we're not going to listen to the public when they reach out to us. However, as far as consideration on these proposed amendments, they would not be a part of the official records.
Okay.
I'd also just like to ask, what is a typical business response? Because in a sense, I'm surprised that we only have from GLI, Hexion, and I forgot the third company right now. You know, so I mean, we've got so many other companies, so I would have thought we would have gotten some more responses. Is it that they're just meeting it and just accepting it, or?
It's hard to say what the typical response is. This is the most significant regulation amendment that has come during my time as regulatory coordinator, even, let alone as secretary treasurer. I will say we were a little bit surprised as the district that we didn't receive more comment, but we did feel that we made a lot of attempts to reach out to the public, and we did reach the public during that ANPR period at the public meeting, and did have some sort of questions from the public during that ANPR period, but no comments there either. I think in general we have sort of seen a lack of engagement due to everything else going on between the pandemic and the unrest over the period of the ANPR last summer. There was a lot going on for people to give their bandwidth to.
Mr. Gary, on the comment received, verbal comment, the one you read that's not on the document here, is the district going to issue a response to that we'll get, and maybe a copy of that comment? Since we have a month to review all these, I've read them, but I would like to see the other one and your response to it.
That one would be, yes, I believe that one will be considered a part of the public hearing, and therefore we can add that to the response to comment documents. And that should be prepared well in advance.
Okay, good.
Chairman Hilton, your phone may be muted. We're not getting any audio from you.
Andy, this is Ms. Hamilton. Have we lost Chairman Hilton?
No, he is there. His WebEx session is unmuted. We're just not receiving his audio. It's either, if he's dialed in on phone, either his phone's muted or his device could be muted.
I believe his device is muted. If I hover over Carl, I see that your microphone is.
Even when I unmute his microphone, I'm not getting any audio.
Or we believe you may need to call into the meeting.
Yeah, because it looks like everything is functioning properly from this side, so it must be either the device somehow got muted or lost its audio connection.
I will recommend that Vice Chairman Sullivan could conduct a roll call vote for delaying the consideration of Regulation 5.15 until the district and the board have been able to prepare all comments for the board review. If Vice Chairman Sullivan would like to conduct the roll call vote on that, I can certainly assist.
Okay, will do. Let me ask a question before I do that. Do I vote?
Yes.
Okay. I'll now take a roll call vote. Please unmute your mic and say yes if you wish to delay a vote on the regulation, and no if you do not. Steve Sullivan, yes. Dr. Coburn,
Yes.
Dr. May,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ms. Allen,
Yes.
and I believe that Keith Joy was not with us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
So the vote is yes, and which delays until all comments can be considered.
Okay. If we, thank you, Vice Chairman. If we are not able to hear the chairman yet, if you'd like to continue up until the director's report,
Will do.
we'll have a presentation.
Okay, the next agenda item is committee reports, and no committees met since our last meeting. Next will be staff reports. Director Hamilton.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Well, it's an interesting year, and we continue to work under this new normal, including difficulties with technology, barking dogs. I've managed to, Byron, give mine a peanut butter filled bone, and just to be sure they don't bark during this portion of the meeting. So I'm exceptionally happy that 1 year after Apcd staff left the building and began working under their new normal conditions, that many of them are now eligible to receive vaccinations in Group 1C, and that many others will be receiving vaccinations soon. You know, this past year has been a year of change, and the next one will be also as we continue to adjust to what will definitely be another new normal. And with schools, libraries, and businesses beginning to open more freely, we expect that that will likely mean changes for the board as well. To date, we've not received any information from the Kentucky Attorney General's office that changes the board's meeting by video teleconference, but we will let you and the public know as soon as that changes. Apcd has been working over the last month to update its strategic plan with 3 new initiatives from the Mayor's Strategic Retreat and review our progress with our current LouisStat goals. And LouisStat is a dynamic metric-based accountability system that cascades down out of the strategic plan that the Metro government uses. So those goals get periodically updated and changed from time to time as new work gets added and the work progresses. So after our last board meeting, we met as an agency to talk about our strategic goals and our LouisStat, and to share some staff realignment and program planning to help us better accomplish our goals. My thanks to Ms. Michelle King for her leadership and to her staff for their commitment to Apcd's mission. Ms. King and Mr. Gary attended last night's meeting of the West Jefferson County Community Task Force, which included a presentation from KICSTA, similar to its presentation before the board last month, and a discussion of COVID-19 from Dr. Ted Smith with the Environment Institute at the University of Louisville. Bradley Coombs and I attended a listening session on the first set of recommended equitable revisions to the Land Development Code. It sounds strange to say this, but it was an incredibly lively meeting and extremely well facilitated. It was quite an enjoyable hour spent yesterday evening. As the work on reviewing the Land Development Code through an equity lens continues, we will plan on asking our partners in planning and design to share information on this project with the board later this year. And by now, you've probably heard about passage of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 to address the pandemic and its economic ramifications and the expected benefits it will bring to Kentucky and Louisville Metro. It's a big bill. It's over 600 pages, and there are a lot of really good folks poring over the details to be sure that the funding that it brings will be used effectively and equitably to address longstanding issues. Apcd has, of course, shared some thoughts on how that funding could be used to address issues that impact air quality, especially those with disparate impacts. But I also wanted to let you know that the Act provides $100 million to US EPA to address health outcome disparities from pollution and the COVID-19 pandemic. This is in addition to the money that Louisville may receive. This appropriation includes $50 million to be used for grants and activities authorized under subsections A through C of Section 103 of the Clean Air Act, and grants and activities authorized under Section 105 of such act. It may not mean a lot to the general reader, but to Apcd, that is music to our ears. That's where we receive our funding to do our day-to-day work and to do our air monitoring, particularly focused on particulate matter. So this is great news for clean air agencies like Apcd, and we'll keep the board up to date on EPA's plan for this funding. Equally as important, it also includes an additional $50 million to be used for grants, contracts, and other agency activities that identify and address disproportionate environmental or public health harms and risks in minority populations or low-income populations under a number of different regulatory authorities, including CERCLA, which is used to address hazardous waste, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and a section of the Clean Air Act that can be shared with communities. This is incredibly important news for burdened communities, many of whom not only shoulder the cumulative impact of impacted air, but also are burdened with poor water quality, old infrastructure, and in a lot of cases, land disposal practices, including old landfills. So we are extremely glad that the Act includes funding to cover that multimedia impact from some of our past activities. So we will also update the board on any global projects that are funded under that provision of the American Rescue Plan. And I look forward to seeing that money actually in the field and being spent. Finally, I want to let you know that Apcd has spent a lot of time in the last month working on a construction and demolition landfill fire. This isn't a complaint that is included in the complaint investigation status report for this month's meeting. So I want to let you know that Apcd does not permit the landfill, but it, like all businesses, are regulated under our general nuisance regulations that deal with odor, dust, and smoke. We first learned about the landfill fire through an odor complaint. On investigation, Apcd's community compliance staff verified that there was an issue and consulted with our industrial compliance staff, who followed up with the landfill for more information. And then our folks reached out to the Kentucky Division for Waste Management to alert them to the issue. We also reached out to the health department in their first responder role to be sure that they were aware of the situation. In response, the Kentucky Division for Waste Management ordered the landfill to stop accepting any waste. They ordered 24-hour clean soil cover be added to smother the fire, and they began air monitoring. Since then, they have been on site daily, and they continue to monitor the landfill's compliance with their orders and to conduct air monitoring. They've been very good partners in this and have kept Apcd informed of their activities. And Mr. Gravett is available if the board has any additional questions about this issue. Are there any questions from the board?
So where's the landfill? 1 mile. 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 1
located on Boat Avenue, near Rouse Avenue. So off of the expressway in West Louisville.
Off the Shawnee Expressway?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
This landfill is the landfill is scheduled to be closed by the Division of Waste Management by February of 2022. It's our understanding that it may actually occur towards the end of the year, a little earlier. If there are no questions, then Matt King.
I'm sorry, I have a question. So what becomes of it once it's closed? Are there future plans for that site?
That's something that will be regulated by the Division of Waste Management. So how it's ultimately used in light of its closed landfill status will be worked out under the state solid waste rules.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. May, we can't hear you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just brought it up because I remember seeing a feature in New Jersey where they redesigned, you know, what used to be a landfill and then kind of had it so that way it would also abate for potential flooding and things like that too. So, so that's why I was curious as to, and that will be, so what they do with that space, you know, could be very productive.
Thank you. Beneficial reuse is definitely something that sites like this can be used for. For example, there are soccer fields on River Road that are former closed solid waste landfills as well. So definitely a beneficial reuse could be done on the property. Thank you very much. And with that, Matt King has a presentation today on Apcd's Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program. As you know, we've added air toxic data to our air quality report, and we've provided information about Apcd's air toxics monitoring, how we acquire that data, how we evaluate its data quality. And now Matt's really going to talk about how the agency got to the point and what we do to address air toxics here in Louisville. Matt?
Thank you, Director Hamilton and board members. Again, I'm Matt King, and I'm the manager of the district's industrial permitting section. I'm going to attempt to share my screen and hopefully get to the right one. So in my screen, I see Director Hamilton and Byron Gary. Can one of you all thumbs up me if you can see a PowerPoint? Excellent, excellent. All right, so the STAR program has been around for about 16 years now, and I want to give a basic explanation of the program, but also try to tie it in as I think it can help give some perspective to the toxics data that has been provided the last several months to the board and to the public. All right, so the STAR program, for many years, citizens and concerned folks knew there were too much toxic air pollutants in most of Louisville, but certainly our industrialized areas, Rubbertown being a real focus. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, some monitoring was done. A lot of that was done through the West Jefferson County Community Task Force, U of L assisted, and EPA also did some evaluation of their own through some modeling, and it really became clear that there was an issue of toxic air pollution in Louisville, primarily in the Rubbertown and West Louisville area. At that time, the district developed and proposed a program. There was a lot of citizen involvement. a lot of industry, who some of which pushed back, but really also realized it was necessary. And we came together and the board was able to pass the STAR program, which is actually several regulations, primarily found in Chapter 5 of the district regulations. STAR is a continuously evaluated program. Even though it's been around for a while, there wasn't a one review that verified compliance and then the work stopped. STAR really does provide a framework for us to determine if emissions are acceptable. And in previous years and presentations, I've used the concept of safe or safe level, and I really want to get away from that. That's really a personal decision that folks, especially living closer to the facilities, really should decide on their own. We should provide a lot of information. But with STAR, I believe STAR is a really solid program, and the acceptable levels of STAR, I think, provide a lot of benefit to the community. Again, it may not be 100% safe. It's certainly not where we need to be. There's work to be done, but we do see a lot of benefit from folks complying with the STAR program. So it required companies, and we'll get into which ones, to really assess all of their toxic emissions. And it requires Apcd to verify that what they're showing us does comply with the STAR program, but also gives us some tools to deal with the sources that aren't doing these specific evaluations. Within the program, there's, I believe it's titled general provision, but it's a general duty concept that says all parties shall take the utmost care and precaution if they emit these toxic chemicals, and really allows us to look at a lot of sources of toxic emissions to try to reduce it in a holistic approach. You note over in the right there, there's looking at just the emissions, but also how they're released. We do use modeling to evaluate in the STAR program how those emissions will affect the air we breathe. And then if needed, we get into reduction plans and certainly verify compliance. So one of the aspects to STAR that I think really makes it a good defensible program is we rely on other experts, toxicologists and researchers, to tell us how toxic are these chemicals. And, there's a wealth of research and science, but it's still, not something that we have a universal understanding of. And the STAR program changes with that science. So over time, knowledge about the negative impacts of these chemicals comes to light. It's reevaluated. And that's something that's really done much better at a research level. And we feed off of that information. We're able to periodically go back to that literature, assess that we're using the right number. And from time to time, we find that number changed, and we will notify companies of those changes. We will verify continued compliance with those lower numbers. And it really is an iterative process that allows us to stay up to date with the latest understanding of these complex health issues. And then, in the core of STAR, which I noted STAR is really bigger than just our permitted sources, but that's the main focus. We look at those permitted sources. They inventory their emissions, their toxic emissions, not just how much does the plant emit, but really a process by process evaluation. And then using dispersion models. So we're looking at a facility or a process that might emit 100 pounds of an air toxic. And we know it comes out of a 50-foot stack. And we can use this dispersion model because it's not specifically how much you emit, it's how does that impact the air we're breathing. And, taller stacks help to disperse that pollution more. Simulated historical weather is run through this model to help direct with the wind flow and with the temperatures and the ability to further disperse those emissions. And we're able to estimate a concentration that is caused by individual processes or whole facilities. And that model really is valuable. We cannot put monitors everywhere, but you can run, a model with thousands of receptor points to estimate the impact of those emissions. And that result out of the model is a concentration, maybe a parts per million, quite often a micrograms per cubic meter, so kind of like a pounds per cubic foot of air, and that's what really matters. What's getting into your lungs? 50 pounds of emissions tells you one thing, but if that's emitted far away from you and high on a tall stack, it has a different impact. So that modeling helps us to estimate that value. And then we can compare it to benchmark ambient concentrations, BACs. Often hear me refer to that as a magic number. And we'll get into what those mean, but those are those numbers that are established by the scientific community as a whole, and that APCD can feed off of to evaluate our sources in our community. STAR sets compliant emission rates as limits and permits. Again, it's easier for us to check that you're emitting below a certain rate than it is to really verify that impact to the air. But that's changing with our new monitor. And then the permit would, and this is really the art of permit writing, develop those compliance demonstration methods. It can't simply be the application said we meet the standard. We want to sometimes electronically monitor processes in stack. Quite often we do stack testing on a periodic basis. But with a lot of processes, if you understand the chemistry and you monitor the inputs and the temperatures and flow rates and the pressures, you can get a really good feel for those emissions. So we not only find out what the acceptable emission rate is, we build in a way to verify that companies are in fact below those emission rates. So STAR again regulates specifically about 200 chemicals. They were broken into 4 categories, and the first category was the chemicals that in those monitoring studies were shown to have an elevated risk. They were really monitored, pulled out of the air, about as direct of measurements as you can do, and those were considered the priority chemicals in category 1. Category 2 was more of a modeled approach with knowledge about who emits what. The EPA was able to predict, although the monitors didn't show them, but again, monitors weren't everywhere during the study, that those additional chemicals, it's 19 more chemicals, likely provide an unacceptable risk in Louisville. And then we went in to pick up in category 3, what's known as the urban air toxics. Sometimes they're called the dirty 30 or the urban soup. So we got any that weren't already in category 1 and 2, and then category 4 picked up all the remaining federal hazardous air pollutants for a total of about 200 chemicals. But again, STAR under that general duty really allows us to look at any troubling chemicals, any new and emerging things maybe that weren't as well understood when STAR passed. But we do believe this group of TACs that are listed, toxic air contaminants, really is a good group that is a representative look at our air and the quality of that air. And then through that, again, that more specific STAR review, we call it an environmental acceptability determination. It's an active review that's been done by companies to verify their emissions are acceptable or to show us what reductions need to be made to be acceptable. And that is done at all of our Title V sources, so all major sources. And then the larger FEDUPs, one of our favorite terms there, those are the facilities that have a potential to be a major source, but have taken limits to not be. So a little smaller, but still a big potential. And so those facilities were required to go through the STAR program in that active sense. And then again, that general duty really allows us to come in and look at a lot of sources that we may not have been aware of in the past or that are new to our community, and make sure we're not missing something there. So that gives the STAR program quite a bit of scope to really help address these important issues of air toxics. I also want to note that the STAR program had a component, it was under Regulation 5.30, that was to look at those smaller sources of air toxics, to do it different than those proactive case-by-case reviews, but to try to find the troubling sources that in and of themselves, as any one source may not be a big issue, but as a whole really add to that toxics levels in the air. And so STAR, it really was an attempt to look at almost all of the sources of toxic air pollution, but really did focus on those larger sources and kind of to get that bigger bang for your buck. So, the STAR program, again, was passed in 05. It really kicked in about 08. That's when the submittals had been turned in, the review was done, and folks needed to comply with this. Several companies, it did take a few years, but many of them were able to show their current emissions were compliant, or to, several good control devices were installed right leading up to STAR. And so pretty quickly, most facilities were able to show compliance with STAR, but that is ongoing with every inspection, with every permit renewal. We're reevaluating and verifying that that information is still accurate, adjusting it where needed, and if we find any issues, addressing those to reduce those emissions to that acceptable level of the STAR program. So kind of a basic overview. There's a lot of details to STAR, that I'm happy to discuss, but aren't as important to the everyday user of the program as maybe to our engineering team. But that's a decent overview of the program. As you all have noticed the last few months, you've been receiving an APCD toxics report that's looking at our Algonquin Parkway monitoring site. And somewhat similar to the lead up to STAR, this is bringing back some real world measurement of air toxics. Again, the West Jefferson County Community Task Force and U of L had used canisters to do sampling for a number of years. That really helped push the STAR program to being passed and implemented. It continued for several years after STAR passed, but unfortunately, I think the funding stopped on that, and we're now back and have been for some time to monitoring air toxics, in this case with a gas chromatograph. It is only one monitor, but it is sited where the past testing showed the point of maximum impact. So that Algonquin Parkway site, we believe, and there's not always a one spot that's the highest impact, but it's in a really good location to monitor and to measure the air quality in and around that Rubbertown community. And so a little different from STAR, where we were evaluating the impact through modeling of a specific facility or even specific processes within that facility. This monitor is an ambient monitor, so it's going to pull in and measure what's in the air. That's not just going to be one source or one group of sources. That's going to bring in, of course, those stationary sources, any power plants, any factories, things of that nature, but also your area sources, your body shops, your gas stations, your backyard fires, as well as the mobile sources, which is really a big chunk of emissions, especially when you look at something like NOx, nitrogen oxides, and certainly air toxics as well. So cars and trucks and trains, whatever is in the air will be pulled into this monitor for evaluation. But that's not to say that the framework of STAR can't help you to understand the levels we're seeing. And we'll talk about that in the next slide just a little bit. But I think something else that's going to be important, because it's not just how much pollution is in the air. I think that's clearly an important topic. It's been the traditional focus of agencies like ours. But we're also going to have a very similar monitor up and running at our Bowman Field station. And that's going to give us that comparison. So certainly want to provide acceptable, clean air for folks. But we also want to see who's bearing the impact of those emissions. And there's certainly a fairness aspect. Not that we all want to have the same level of dirty air. Clean air is the primary objective, but also that fairness of, is your air a little cleaner than mine? It really will help us understand, again, not exactly which source was making that situation or source is, but what is in the air as a whole. What are people breathing? And that's, obviously more important than what is the impact of any one set of facilities. All right, so to kind of give that perspective.
Excuse me, Matt?
Yes.
I was just curious as to how long has it been between the where we're doing now with gas chromatograph versus the canisters. So
I'm going to give that an estimate, and we can certainly get you the exact dates. I believe the canisters existed up until maybe 2012, 2013, somewhere around that time frame. And then we picked up, with some really testing of this device a couple of years ago, but last year we started to produce very good defensible data from it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, again, how can that framework of STAR, which is important as we regulate those stationary sources, help to understand this toxics report? And so really the currency of toxics is oftentimes called risk when it's dealing with a carcinogenic effect. And then there's also hazard quotient, which is those non-carcinogenic effects, those issues with organs, some reproductive issues, very serious, but a different mechanism than cancer. And you'll note on the toxics report, we not only list the current measurements, but we list that benchmark ambient concentration. And again, that magic number. And it represents for carcinogenic pollutants 1 additional cancer per million if you increase the concentration by that BAC. So if the BAC is 3 micrograms per cubic meter, and we're measuring right at 3 micrograms per cubic meter in the air, you would, through that toxicological assessment, that risk assessment, you would assume that would be 1 additional cancer per million people exposed to that. The hazard quotient, you have that same concept, that ratio of what's in the air to that benchmark level for that pollutant. And the way they speak about that is a hazard quotient that below 1, there are no adverse effects expected. And, that is, again, that if you're right at that benchmark level, it's considered a 1 and there'd be no adverse health effects. Again, this is a toxicological assessment. There's a lot of unknowns about how these pollutants affect humans. And so I'm not here to tell you at below that level, no one should have any concern, but that's the language of toxics. And in this case, averaging time really does matter. So we're providing monthly averages in the toxics report for all the carcinogenic pollutants. And some have a number for both carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic effects. But if it's shown to be a carcinogenic pollutant, we have a value established by the research community that is an annual average level. So we can compare those measured levels. Again, you would want to have an annual average, but a monthly average starts to inform you of what that annual average might look like. And you compare that to that BAC for that carcinogenic effect. Do that ratio. At twice the BAC, you have a risk of 2 in a million. The non-carcinogenic factors for these pollutants, a lot are annual. Most of the ones in the toxics report you'll see are annual, with the exception of ethyl acrylate. That has a non-carcinogenic effect that is evaluated on a 24-hour average. So you'll note we provide the 24-hour maximum average, which day had the highest readings. And that is a value that for most of those, we don't really have a number to compare to in the STAR program. But for ethyl acrylate, having a 24-hour benchmark level would allow you to compare those numbers. And again, do that ratio and have that statistical meaning that's needed to have that correct averaging period assigned to your measurements. And so that ratio of benchmark to what's really in the air, that, there's a lot of ways to look at this data. and certainly short-term effects and things of that nature are important. But from a STAR perspective, being able to compare those measurements in the appropriate averaging period to those BACs can help us. Again, we may not all agree on where that acceptable level should be, but help us get a prioritization and a sense of perspective to what we're measuring. And so EPA often works with not a bright line of 100 in a million, but a lot of their rules, if the estimated risk from a compliant facility is below that 100 in a million mark, they're pretty good with that rule. And toxics are really an orders of magnitude conversation, but every little bit changes the scenario. So if they were to get 110, they would likely still approve a rule. But 100 is kind of their mark. STAR is a little more specific than that. STAR sets up different, what it calls goals, but they're regulatory requirements. And it really looks at a tighter level. And again, this is when we're evaluating those stationary sources through that active review, and that uses the modeling because we're going to want to find that modeled maximum impact for dozens of sources for hundreds of processes, and that modeling is a powerful tool for that. And in that case, for a single chemical from a single process, the STAR goal is 1 in a million, one additional cancer. If it's that hazard quotient, it's 1. Again, that's just a unitless 1 as a hazard quotient. And then really where the meat of STAR is those cumulative goals. So for a whole facility, all processes, all carcinogenic chemicals, the impact must be below 7.5 in a million. And then STAR also has a goal of 10 in a million that it lists for all applicable tax. So, there's been some difference of opinion on that, but to me, that is for those specifically subject sources. Their cumulative risk evaluated through this modeling process, cumulatively looked at, should not exceed 10 in a million. And not to get too into the weeds, but these goals are cut down for new processes and new facilities. And they're also allowed to go up if the impact is on an additional facility, an industrial facility. But these are the goals for any residential area. And again, those goals are regulatorily required. And, you don't need to memorize all the different limits, but to see that it's not really always about being right at or below the benchmark concentration. Sometimes it could be 7.5 to 10 times that benchmark concentration, and STAR would deem that compliant. So I don't want to send too much of a mixed signal, but I'll take questions here in just a second. But I don't think we can specifically apply these goals to simply say yes or no, we're happy with, or we need to do more based on this toxic monitoring. But it does provide some framework and allows you to kind of get the concept of ratio of real measurement to benchmark level, and to look and say, is this a number that is, really a good thing, and we're happy at this low level? Is this a level that deems further review of emissions and action, and what are next steps? Hopefully this kind of gives some framework as you review that data, and certainly as we generate lots and lots more of that data to start building those longer term averages, and hopefully take a similar look as was done in the past. We have a lot of engineers, we have a lot of environmental scientists, but that kind of toxicological review, very statistical review, to let us know what the current air looks like, to be able to compare that to the air shortly before the STAR program, and then hopefully in the near future to compare that to the air quality at the Bowman Field location, and to give us a picture. It's not going to answer every question. I wish these were just math problems and you solve for the answer and everybody's happy, but to just give some framework, an ability to discuss these things. All of these chemicals have different levels of impact, and this risk is a way to kind of put them in a to be able to compare apples to apples, and that's not easy to do for air toxics. So Hopefully this provided enough insight to have a feel for the STAR program. I'm happy to come back and give more detail. I'll take questions now, but really at any time, if folks want to shoot me questions through email or relay them maybe through Byron Gary, we'll put together the right folks and get you all some answers on those things. It's really a complex program. It's done a lot of good for air quality, but I think with this new data, certainly 15 plus years passing since its inception, we're going to have to take a look at things again and decide how to proceed. With that, I'll say thanks for your time and open it up to any questions you might have.
So Matt, when do you, with the new data coming in, would you anticipate there will be changes to the regs, and when would you open that question up?
Well, I think the first step would be, possibly the first step would be is to get a feel for the acceptability of the data. We've already got several months out there, and I don't think it would surprise folks to hopefully say we don't show a alarming, catastrophic type measurements, but we're probably not going to show really, really clean air. So that's going to be the tough part is where to put our resources, and I think they're going to have to try to pull out what is coming from the stationary sources that the traditional STAR program affects, and maybe some other techniques to go after some other sources of pollution might prove to be a little more effective. But really, it's a conversation with the community, with you all as a board, to help decide that. I really think the district can inform on these issues, and we certainly should share our opinion, but there's a lot of moving parts to this, and I don't think it should just be a technical review of this data. I think there's a lot at play as far as what those next steps are. So not trying to dodge the question. I don't know what will come of it. Certainly reg changes, I think, are on the table, but if the data shows that the issue is driven more by mobile sources, we might need to look at strategies that really impact those kind of things. So time will tell, but I don't think there'll ever be a clear playbook that just presents itself. We're going to have to figure it out.
Mr. King, if I could comment there. In particular, the STAR program is a really broad program, and as Matt explained, it has that general duty provision that would allow us to regulate other sources under our jurisdiction, but that the program itself already includes a provision in Section 6, provides that the district may seek further protection for regulated sources based on monitoring. So right now, where we're at is, those provisions built into the current regulatory program. It's broad in its scope. We hope that the board will review the STAR program as we go through this process. Our goal is to collect this data, then seek to have it reevaluated in the same way as the West Louisville air toxic study, which is the initial study that Matt mentioned, so that we can continue to compare apples to apples and then decide, does the current regulatory program provide us with additional support, or does it need modification? But I really recommend that the board take the time to read not just Reg 521, which is kind of where all the rules get applied, but the entire STAR program, which is in Part 5 of the district's regulations. And there, I think you'll see those things that Matt's been talking about this morning. It's a dynamic regulatory program. It's based on science that changes frequently. It's based on our understanding of sources that change. And so, as Matt answers questions for you, it is something that staff here are uniquely situated to deal with. This is not something that other local air pollution control programs, or quite frankly, more than a handful of states actually implement. So with that, Matt, back to you.
Any other questions?
I have a question for Mr. King. Dr. May, you can go ahead with me if you want. Go ahead.
I was in that space of like 8-10 years. Then, have there been other new developed stationary sources, new factories? Have places closed down? So the thing is, since it is a dynamic, thing that we're looking at, is the information we're gathering, valid? I guess. So that's my first question. The second question is just when, in that last, there was that category when you had this different kinds of things that we're monitoring for. So when we said like the new chemicals that may have kind of come up, I guess, how are we finding that out? Is that something that the EPA kind of provides for us? Are we asking for the companies to give us, what it is that they're looking for? I mean, how do we know if there's new things that we should be looking for?
I'm
Okay,
going to jump to the
go ahead, sure.
regulatory side and simply say that under the STAR program itself, it requires us to go and look at the benchmark ambient concentrations for the chemicals that we regulate to see if there have been changes to strengthen the benchmark ambient concentration or to lower it, to make it more stringent. When that happens, the rules provide that companies must demonstrate acceptability with that lower level or make changes in order to comply. And that's happened periodically. Matt's group takes care of reviewing that data and that information and reaching out to companies when there are new and emerging chemical concerns out there, Dr. May. And Billy has indicated that I'm hard to hear, and I apologize for that. With new and emerging chemicals, yes, EPA is an excellent partner in helping us to keep abreast of chemicals that they are identifying may present special hazards. That includes things like ethylene oxide, which has recently been an issue of concern and further investigation by U.S. EPA. But there's a tremendous amount of scientific work that goes on through academic institutions across the nation that help us understand what's happening in our airspace. Matt can talk about how our sources provide us with information that comes out of their system. And Matt, if you would please touch on the 3.8 in for new processes, existing sources, and new companies.
Okay, and yeah, I think Rachel covered the chemicals pretty good, but certainly the PFAS are kind of the big one that's a new and emerging chemical. EPA has done a lot. The state of North Carolina has done a lot to inform folks about that. It is not a concern here in Louisville, especially getting your water out of the river. But we don't have a whole lot of that as a source of emissions of that in our community, luckily. But we don't have a whole lot of action on bringing in new chemicals. But main point is that the reg does allow that to occur, and certainly opens up to sources that aren't specifically covered by the STAR program, chemicals that aren't specifically covered. But the wealth of knowledge by the researchers out there that's existed for many years doesn't bring those up on a regular basis. There's not a monthly update to concern chemicals, but that safety net is out there. So as far as the new facilities in town, I think what we're measuring, I have a high level of confidence in both the measurements and the people taking the measurements. Our monitoring team really runs a tight ship. And so it's really good data of what's in the air today. Certainly the emissions profile has changed since that modeling, and I did get a firm date. It lasted up until 2013, that canister monitoring, and it was showing reductions by and large to those concentrations as well. But the trend has been a reduction of stationary source toxics. There's still plenty out there, but most facilities are showing a reduction in emissions. We haven't had a lot of new, greenfield facilities, but facilities do modify and change. And sometimes that causes an increase to emissions, but the overall trend is a reduction in those emissions. So we would expect to see that reduction in our monitoring, but it won't be a direct comparison to the exact same fleet of facilities that were there in the 2000s. Hopefully that answers that. And then Rachel's point on the 3.8. So I noted that facilities are required that their overall risk through that specific STAR approach, through modeling, is below 7.5 in a million. If you're an entirely brand new facility, STAR cuts that almost in half to 3.8 in a million. But if you're an existing facility that is modifying or having new construction, your sum of your new and modified facilities, components at your facility, must be below 3.8. So STAR kind of drives the newer facilities, the newer processes at existing facilities to be cleaner than the existing processes. Hopefully that gave you enough to at least get your head around it.
Thank you.
And then Dr. Coburn, I think you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question. After you've gathered a sufficient amount of data from both of these monitors, let's say a year's worth or something like that, do you intend to, I'm sure you intend to compare the concentrations from each location, but how about comparing the ambient concentrations with the predictions from models?
Certainly, and we've already done a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because these models, and I'm not a modeler myself, but I'll pretend to be quite often. I went and EPA modeler presented, and his first slide said, "All models are wrong, some are useful." And I think you've done some modeling in your time, so I don't hope you take offense to that. It's just a hard thing to predict an exact number, but they're really good tools compared to just guessing. So you would want them to line up, and certainly when you have a really exclusive chemical that's emitted by a facility, you should see something pretty close in the monitor. Unfortunately, a lot of these are also products of combustion, so they're going to come from mobile sources as well. And I think that will be something the district will attempt to do, is to look at the numbers that people might think are the priority concern pollutants and try to figure out if that is from a facility or if it's from some of those area and mobile sources. Verify that the facility is properly measuring their emissions, if it is a facility type pollutant. And I think that's exactly what we must do, but I kind of caution it won't be a CSI type conclusive evaluation, that there's, even when you have a single source, a power plant in the middle of nowhere, and you do a model, it's not perfectly in line with the monitor. So we'll have to kind of live with that, but hopefully be able to pull out those things that are obviously, throwing off that value if it's not lining up to what was anticipated. But I think that's a very direct approach that we'll have to take as we look at these numbers.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And again, just email or bring them through maybe Byron, Gary, any other questions, and I'll be happy to come back and talk more about STAR. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Chairman Sullivan, I believe the meeting is returned back to you.
Okay. I guess we'll move on to the reports that have been distributed prior to the meeting. And are there any questions from board members on any of the reports, air quality data enforcement status report, excess emissions report, or the compliance investigation status summary? I actually have a couple. So not hearing any other ones, I'll ask mine. One relates to a news article I saw where a power plant in New Albany, I believe, was shutting down early. And I was curious if, that may be old news to you guys. what impact do you expect that to have on some of the questions related to the ozone issue that has been on the table?
Thank you for asking that question. And frankly, its impact on Louisville's air quality will be great. It is a plant that has, as part of a consent decree, shut down 2 of the units previously. It was slated to fully close later in late 2022, 2023. So we are happy to see it closing earlier. The 2 remaining units have been controlled and used in a peaker type standby condition. So it's not run all the time, it runs intermittently. But it will have a substantial reduction in NOx. When it's used in the summer, of course, that will assist in reducing NOx as part of that NOx, nitrogen oxide, volatile organic compound soup that mixes in the presence of sunlight and creates ozone. So it's a benefit for our area.
Thank you. And the other question I had related to the PM 2.5, and I raised this last month, but I noticed that the last data point increased quite a bit. And I just think it'd be interesting to obviously keep an eye on that and see if that is becoming a trend, or is there a reason that it jumped as much as it did?
So I'm very glad you asked that question, and there are some folks on the call from our air monitoring section, but at this point, we've added on different types of equipment that appears to be more sensitive than our previous method. And what we'd like to do is be sure that we explain this to the board more fully with a presentation, probably at the May board meeting, given what we have on the calendar for next month's board meeting and Earth Day. If that's acceptable to the board, we will plan to provide that information to you as part of the May board meeting.
That sounds fine. You think it covers a number of the parameters that you measure, or this one in particular?
In particular, from a PM 2.5 standpoint, so back to the new normal here, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties in that we've lost Mr. Purdon, and we now have an alternate host. So rather than ask her to elevate folks, I'll simply say that the methodology that we're using is for our particulate monitors. So it's for that PM 2.5 portion. And then we can talk about what may be a difference from a statistical standpoint, in particular looking at that 24-hour average, and what we may be seeing as part of the COVID-19, everyone's at home, and we've seen an uptick in backyard activities that may be influencing some of that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions from board members on the reports? Not hearing any, then we'll join the meeting. And the next meeting will be Wednesday, April 21st at 10 a.m. And I'm pretty sure if I go, Dr. May.
Before we adjourn, I just wanted to ask, I don't know, I guess Rachel was in the news this recent week regarding greenhouse emissions report. And so I just, and so that is not something that we are monitoring at this time, but I just was hoping you might elaborate a little bit more on that aspect of the, and this isn't specifically with the HFC 23.
So thank you so much for asking about that, Dr. May. With respect to greenhouse gases, Apcd does not receive a report from a company about their greenhouse gases like we get information about their emissions of, let's say, particulate matter or nitrogen oxide. Instead, that information is reported directly to US EPA by the companies. So there is a greenhouse gas inventory that they must comply with. It goes into a database that we are able to access. So the information is available to our partners here in Metro Sustainability when they are looking at projects that may impact and reduce greenhouse gases. So does that answer your question?
It did. I know. I mean, one of your comments is that you're trying to get direction from the federal level as to what we would do if we were to do anything about it. And in a sense, since that's going to affect the ozone and then in turn affect our NOx, I mean, it seems that we should be playing a more active role in that, because that is, was a major, was a bad number, and would take care of a lot of the little things we're doing if we could take care of the big thing out there. So I didn't know with what we were talking about in the beginning with the funding and programs, so are we going to have that as a new target that will be under our jurisdiction, or it feels like a big gorilla that's in the room or the big elephant that we're not doing anything about.
So let me be clear that your concern is about greenhouse gases or HFC 23.
Well, I guess the HFC 23 was because that was a single company that was, having lots of emissions of that, which was contributing to the greenhouse gases. So that would be, and so for our community, that would be like a single item to be able to target. I guess in terms of the greenhouse, because there's obviously other things that contribute to that. Sounds like it would be too big of a bailiwick for us to take on as well. So
a couple things with respect to greenhouse gases and their impact, on us. I'll start with the voluntary side, because right now through the Mayor's Climate Action and activities through the Louisville Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability, there are measures being taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions here in Louisville. Every time there is a step taken that reduces greenhouse gas, there's typically a benefit to Apcd's regulatory work. If you stop combusting coal, for example, it reduces PM and, of course, reduces nitrogen oxides, which then lead to ozone formation. So that is a great benefit for us. What I do know about this current administration is that at the end of the Obama administration, there was a suite of regulations on the books that applied to the largest emitters of greenhouse gases primarily. Apcd had a role in that program. Those regulations were subsequently rolled back. And now with a new team coming into place with the White House, many of the folks who drafted those regulations, Gina McCarthy in particular, who is EPA administrator in the Obama administration, is now in the White House to focus on greenhouse gases again. There will likely be regulations. It's quite possible that there may also be legislation that addresses greenhouse gases as an amendment to the Clean Air Act, for example, to provide a little bit more certainty and let everyone know where to make investments. The Clean Air Act is one of those continuous improvement plans. This is a pollutant that needs to be addressed at a national and global level. And so we look forward to see what work comes out of the administration on that. And we stand as ready partners for our sustainability folks here in Louisville Metro to help them better understand where their efforts will improve Louisville's air quality.
Yeah. So, but we give the permits for that factory, correct?
That's true, but HFC 23 is not a regulated air pollutant. So it's not a hazardous air pollutant under the Clean Air Act, and it's not a toxic air contaminant under our Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program. They do have a plan in place to voluntarily reduce those emissions by 99% by the end of 2022. So that appears to be an initiative that without regulation is taking off.
Yeah, but I think that, back in 2014, they had stated that they had goals to reduce it, and then since there was rollbacks, there was really no incentive. And now, there's gonna be, they're re-incentivized, I don't know, but the question is, you know, is that, some people are saying that, that's fine, but that's too long, to wait till that's reduced to at the end of 2022, is that we should be doing something at this point and, having them, if that's all they can handle in terms of reducing the emission, that's all they should put out then. So, but I don't know that we really have any ability to do anything. And then I don't know as a part of the city, whether we have any ability to do anything.
So, the board is charged with being able to pass regulations when, under KRS Chapter 77, it finds that the air is so polluted that it may take steps to pass reasonable regulation. So that's within the board's authority. With respect to what the city can do, the city is undertaking in the Office of Sustainability climate adaptation plan that includes steps to reduce greenhouse gases here locally and to meet very stringent targets. Unfortunately, we've been working on 6 criteria pollutants for toxics for the last 50 years under the Clean Air Act. Changing an economy is like turning a very large ocean liner, and it does take some time. Even projects such as the one that appears to be contemplated by Comores, those too take time. They take time to properly engineer, to go through the permitting process, and that includes a permitting process with Apcd to be sure that we understand that the technology will work appropriately, that in its own adding thermal oxide after any system will add combustion into our atmosphere. We understand what those combustion products and how they too will impact our quality. But in addition to design, there are fabrication requirements, and so that 2-year time frame is not unusual with a unique product.
Okay.
Okay, is any other questions? And if not, we'll adjourn the meeting until our next meeting, which is again Wednesday, March 21st at 10 a.m. Thanks.